Hey everybody, my name is Paul Eston Jr., aka Boy Green. Welcome to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below for all the latest in New York Jets world. And we've got a phenomenal guest, a superstar, joining us on the show. And one of my all-time favorites, her name is Stefania Bell. And of course, you should already know who that is. But just to give you an intro anyway, she is ESPN's injury analyst and, of course, the star of the Fantasy Football podcast, Fantasy Focus podcast, rather. Let's bring her in. Stefania, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me. I don't know if my co-hosts would agree with that intro that I'm the star of the podcast, but I'm a member of the podcast and I appreciate the very kind words.
Well, let's jump in on the injury stuff first. Now, some of this doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It doesn't seem to be a thing, but I want to start with Mekhi Becton, the New York Jets left tackle. And earlier this offseason, he battled some plantar fasciitis. So first off, I just want people to try to understand better, what is plantar fasciitis?
Basically, it's pain in your arch, and it's due to irritation of this band of tissue that spans really the entire arch, runs from your heel up to the base of the toes. And the plantar fascia is really important to the whole architecture of the foot because it essentially creates that dynamic support that is the arch. So when you step on the ground, it splays. It's what allows you to hit the ground, and it kind of stretches. And when you pick the foot up off the ground, it basically contracts up, and so it's creating this. It's like a suspension bridge is kind of the best analogy I can give you for it and what it does to the foot. So it's important, but it can get irritated, and it's not uncommon. A lot of us have experienced plantar fascia pain at some point or another. And fasciitis, the itis, it usually means inflammation. But whether it's an acute thing or it can be sometimes a chronic condition, and that's what you worry about when you hear about an NFL player getting it. Is this going to be something that's going to be a chronic recurring problem that could cause issues later, even if it's resolved for now? So speaking about Becton, obviously, when you're a big guy, when you're 6'7" and upwards of 360, when that plantar fascia has to be strong, right? It's absorbing a load every time you step on the ground, much less when you're planting and digging and you're encountering resistance. So it's subject to a lot of load and stress, and for whatever reason, whether there was a precipitating event, it's hard to know, but it sounded like it kind of started to bother him in the spring. And he wasn't really practicing during OTAs as a result. The good news is he came into camp and Robert Saleh said he was fine. But there was a lot of mention along the way about what it meant to be in shape, what it meant to be a professional, how you have to, really watch what you're doing, hydration and weight. Now, these guys they're not, you don't want them super lean and skinny, right? Because in order to do the job that he does, if you have him protecting your quarterback, he needs to be a big guy. But you can still be fit. You can still have a level of fitness, and you can be fit and strong and still be large. And so I think whatever the message was, I think it got to him because Saleh commented on what great shape he was in when training camp rolled around. Can't say that it won't crop up again, but there are things they can do. They can modify shoes with some inserts, give it a little more support. Sometimes after a player experiences an episode of plantar fasciitis, they'll look at some things like that to sort of help try and manage it and avoid a recurrence of it. But do you approach it there's not anything to do. There's no sense worrying about it because it's resolved for now. But could it come back? Yeah, it could.
Stefania, can you address something for us? Because you mentioned it a little bit in there. A lot of people, when they heard plantar fasciitis, Mekhi Becton, they went, it's just some fat guy. He's overweight. That's why. He's got all this weight that's pressing down on his feet. That's what happened. Is there a correlation between that and the weight? Because, players I remember like Antonio Gates, he was a guy who battled it a little bit in his career, but it's not like he was 300 pounds. So it doesn't just, I guess, address that for the correlation between weight and this issue.
It's really, weight can be a factor because, you're loading tissue and anytime you do that, the physics of it comes into play, but it can also be your foot structure. We talk about feet. Some feet are more rigid than others. You've seen people have high arches, people have flat arches. But so there's a lot about the foot architecture that can sort of present risk factors, if you will, for people to be more inclined to develop a problem versus another. So it's not just about the size or the weight. It's a lot about what specifically your foot anatomy looks like, and also everything else. What's your overall tissue flexibility like? Is there a genetic component? We know some people, their tissue is a little more elastic than others. You know, if you have a history of ankle problems and calf problems, that can then bias your plantar fascia to being more at risk. So there are a lot of different factors that can play in, and people of any size can develop this.
All right, no, good. It's good to get some clarity on that, because a lot of
Eli
people,
Manning, if you recall, Eli Manning years ago had a plantar fascia problem that was bothering him a lot. Eli, one of the things he's known for is his durability. I mean, he just did not miss games. And so even though he was limping around, he was pretty uncomfortable for a while. They were able to manage it. He was still able to play, but you know, he's not that he's a very different build than Mekhi Becton, but yet he had the same problem.
Right, absolutely. And let's go from one foot to the other, and that is Quinton Williams, who earlier this offseason broke a bone in his foot, and then all of a sudden he was on the shelf for much of the offseason up until the second week of the preseason against the Green Bay Packers. And I want to ask you, and we'll get into Robert Saleh and your beloved 49ers in a second, but I do want to ask you about a comment that Robert Saleh made that I went interesting when he was talking about bringing Quinton back, and he broke a bone in one of his feet. And then Robert Saleh said, the worry is we don't want to rush him back because we don't want it happening to the other foot. And he didn't really expound upon that. So I want to ask you, Stefania, you're the expert. Is that specific situation a potential of an overcompensation issue, that if Quinton was to come back early and if he was kind of worried about putting too much weight on the broken bone part of the foot, he was putting all the weight on the other, that in theory he could have done that same thing to the other side? Is that kind of what Saleh was indicating there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he was suggesting, is you don't want to have a guy rushing to get back, compensating, and then overloading the other side, because what are you going to do if you're having discomfort? Let's call it discomfort, because after the surgery, you know, they put a screw in and basically you're allowing time for the recovery from that procedure. The screw stabilizes the fracture. So you're not worried about a fracture per se. You're worried about just the healing of the foot itself, the wound healing, et cetera, and getting back to using your foot normally. And if you're not able to push off plant, a lot of it is torsion related too. You know, the foot's in the ground, and so guys who are coming up out of a stance or kind of trying to come around the edge, you know, the way that their foot might stick in the ground and pivot, is that uncomfortable to the extent that they shift off that a little bit. They're doing things differently on the other side, and then maybe stressing that foot a little bit more. It's not necessarily like, oh, he's at a really high risk naturally for this, but they're trying to avoid any of the compensatory things. You know, certainly you could do also something on the same side. You could end up, you know, having a soft tissue injury somewhere relatively close up the chain because you're not doing things properly or with your typical mechanics while you're trying to protect it. So I think all those things, they sort of are going through his mind. And look, Robert Saleh dealt with like a plethora of injuries last year, and he's probably a little bit snake bitten by that and thinking, I want to make sure we at least start the season as healthy as we can. So there's no reason to do too much now.
By the way, I need to apologize, Stefania, for the Jets 49ers. I know that's a dark chapter last year, you know, at MetLife Stadium. So
yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh. I know. I was thinking you were talking about taking our coaches, but no, week two is like etched in every 49er fan's brain because it was like the massacre of the 49ers.
Yeah. So again, I don't know if you've gotten any apologies from the Jets side after all that, but let me be the first then. There you go.
Well, thank you.
Of course. So on Quinton in particular, for guys that are, you know, again, he's coming off a really good year, and, you know, a lot of people are hyped up about it, but some people are concerned with the foot, and a big guy, can he maintain the same explosiveness that he had prior to the surgery? A lot of people are worried about that.
Yeah, he should absolutely be able to get that back. There's a buildup to it. Obviously, you don't come out and, no pun intended, hit the ground running exactly the same. There is a buildup to it. And that's why I think they activated him when they did, so they could kind of ramp up his practice, his conditioning, everything he would need to have him ready by week 1. And assuming that there's no unusual setback, he should be ready to go by week 1, but there's no reason to think he can't be doing what he was before.
Again, Stefania, for those who don't know, your beloved San Francisco 49ers are your team of choice, and the Jets pillaged the village this offseason, taking anything in the kitchen sink away from you. So I need your thoughts on Robert Saleh. He's a guy that's been in conversations to potentially be a head coach this year or that year, and finally everything kind of works together, and he ends up coming here to the Jets. Give us the Robert Saleh. How do you feel about him as a person and as a coach, and finally getting this opportunity to run his own ship?
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but I feel like I do because of my passion for the 49ers, as you mentioned. And on the one hand, I'm happy for him for getting the opportunity. I think we all knew, we as like 49ers fans I'm speaking for, I think we all recognized that the talent was there. He certainly, you could just see the way he engaged with the players as well, that you felt like the players wanted to run through a brick wall for him. And that's hard to capture. You have a lot of coaches who are talented, but it's hard to get players who just want to lay it all on the line for a coach and are really engaged with him at that level. And I think we all saw that as his status got elevated and he was more visible when the 49ers went to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, people were like, who is this guy? That's, just his intensity on the sideline. He was a natural magnet for the camera. He has this habit of running stadiums when they do away games. He goes in and runs the stadium steps beforehand. So there'd be these videos of him working out. So everybody's like, they love to see the coach who's working out intensely before the game. He always looks like he's incredible. I mean, he is intense, but he wears it on his face. And yet, that has such a positive relationship with the players. It's this combination of being a guy where you wouldn't want to be on the other end of his fist if you were in a fist fight, but you can see also that his players really love him. And I think we just saw the results of the 49ers defense. I mean, that defense went from being fairly terrible not so long ago. And if you listen to the podcast, you know that Matthew's been only too happy to talk about when my 49ers were good and then terrible and the good. And, it's just reflection of how long I've been around that I've witnessed this arc, of the 49ers back and forth. But most recently that, before Robert Saleh, that defense was bad. And he really was very instrumental in the construction of a defense that was more impressive than the offense. Honestly, we have this, right now, the skill position players we have on offense and the mind of Kyle Shanahan. I think the 49ers run as sophisticated an offense with so many opportunities to outmatch the team that they're playing, but you need all the parts, and we haven't been totally healthy, and not everyone at every position has been outstanding. And I think where Robert Saleh excels is really is the defensive line, the defensive front. And he has built this defense that can just move offenses backwards. In addition to the takeaways that they have, they are just monsters at the line. They win that position battle all the time. We didn't have great secondary play, or not, at least not consistently. So that ought to be, don't know how that will develop over there in New York, but I got to imagine the players on the Jets defensive, well, all of them. I still think of him as the defensive guy, but I got to imagine all the players are enjoying playing for him now. What's your take?
I got to tell you, the story, and he told it in the press conference, of like one of the first practices he did as the head coach. He after practice, he went in his normal spot as the defensive coordinator, just sat sat back, and then he was waiting, and he's like, "Oh man, when's the head coach going to get up there? Oh shoot, I'm the head coach." And then it was just the thing that I've gotten so far is just the genuineness. It seems like he is just all Saleh, and whatever that you take it or leave it, that's who he is, and he's just. That's the thing that I've gotten in press conferences. That's the thing that we've gotten in our short interactions with him, and things are starting to come back at least a little bit to be able to be, face to face with him, with the rest of the media, and that's cool. But the genuineness is what stands out, and that's just so cool. And that's really, quite frankly, what's been relatable to the Jets early on.
Yeah, I think it's awesome, and I'm sad for us that we don't have that energy in the 49ers locker room anymore, because I think he just brought something that was so unique. But all of my friends who are diehard fans like me, we're all sort of cheering for the Jets now. We were certainly not cheering after week 2 last year, but we're all sort of cheering for the Jets now, because that's what you love about him, and we just want to see him have that success. We think he can. We think this is what I believe the organization has needed. I think it's got to be. I mean, I didn't follow the Jets closely. I was not often there at camps or anything, but I've got to imagine there's a whole different feel just in terms of the style with this change of administration, if you will.
To say the least. To say the least. I do have to ask you, and you mentioned last year with the 49ers, and it was tough, and it was probably the start of the Jets trip, and everything just, went downhill from there from an injury perspective. Unfortunately for Robert, it was one beat reporter. I probably should throw Connor Hughes of The Athletic under the bus, because he mentioned, he's like, wow, the Jets have been so healthy this offseason. This is great. And then as soon as that happened, Carl Lawson, Vinny Curry, and then it's a rain and it pours kind of scenario. And I feel that Robert Saleh is getting robbed here, because there was a lot of belief. Jared Davis and Daniel Dopp, shout out for his former Lion, is that, they had all these pieces that they had a vision for. And unfortunately, for at least most of them, we're not going to see what that vision was. So he's going to have to just try to figure it out. But that's what he did last year. And I'm intrigued by that. From your fans' perspective, as a 49ers gal last year, things started going south with Nick Bosa and everybody else getting injured for the 49ers, and yet they figured it out, and Richard Sherman was on the podium, and that was one of the things that made me fall in love with Robert Saleh and the pre-hiring process, how he pounded the podium for Robert Saleh getting a job. And, of course, your colleague over there, Robert Saleh, did the interview on the Adam Schefter podcast. I'm like, this Saleh guy, man, he's fascinating. Wow. I'm intrigued, and I'm just hearing him, and wow. And obviously there's something there that rallies the troops. And even though guys got injured, they still figured it out. And they were a pretty good defense, it looked like, statistically.
Yeah, and he's sort of been dealing with that. 49ers have had some injury issues for a couple of years. So I don't think, even though it just felt like all at once, and because I think they lost Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas in the same game last year. And, so it was like a lot at once. And Nick Bosa is clearly such a game changer that was, it was huge. And it really was irreplaceable. But I think he's also a guy who's he likes that depth at the line anyway. So his philosophy is, we're just going to keep moving parts around, and we're going to do what we have to do. And you acknowledge the loss of the personnel, but you don't hang out there. You start moving people in and making adjustments and I think maybe because he had to do that in San Francisco, it's actually going to really help him here with the Jets, because it's not like he had the perfect setup and he just had to hang back and watch. He was challenged to sort of move the chess pieces around, and that's probably going to make it easier for him to do the same thing in New York.
Again, we're speaking with Stefania Bell, superstar, ESPN injury analyst and all. She is fantastic. Make sure you follow her on all social media. Stefania, can you tell me what an offense looks like? I barely even know what the word means, being here and covering the Jets for as long as we've had. So they're bringing over the San Francisco Jets, the New York 49ers. They've got this thing going over, but we don't know what it is. Michael Flores never called plays before. So Jet fans are curious, what does the 49ers offense, or in theory, this Jets offense, what is it going to look like? What can you tell us from all your years watching and enjoying the 49ers?
Well, and I just don't know, I don't know who Mike LaFleur will be as a play caller. Like you said, he was the wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator in San Francisco, but this will be his first round calling plays. But let's see, he's got a brother who's handling head coaching duties.
Not bad.
It's pretty good. And, he's hanging out with Salah, who is this leader on defense. So I think that actually makes it easier on LaFleur because he knows the defensive side is handled. But being at the 49ers, sort of got to witness the genius that is Kyle Shanahan. And I think what you see, there's a lot more running to the 49ers game, I think, than people appreciate, in the sense of when you think about running offenses, if you think of like ground and pound, you think of like Cleveland or somewhere like that, where you're seeing these grinding runners. San Francisco's run game isn't really like that. And there's a versatility in the offense, and Bobby Turner, who's the running backs coach, who's legendary. I think one of the things that I was at the Niners camp this year, and Wayne Gallman, who was released, and I think he went to Atlanta now, the Falcons.
Yes, that's right.
And obviously formerly in New York with your neighbors, the Giants. But one of the things he said really stuck with me, that he said, he came from a team where he had to know everything about his position as a running back, what was expected of him, his position. He goes, but when you get here at the 49ers, he's like, Bobby Turner wants you to know the whole offense. You need to know what everybody's doing, because at any minute you can get plugged into that position. We've seen Brandon Aiyuk as a wide receiver scored 2 rushing touchdowns last year, which it's not unusual in this day and age for running backs to catch passes. And certainly you see a lot of that in the San Francisco offense, but they're built on a yards after the catch sort of system as well. If you look at a lot of their receivers, they are breakaway runners. They can make a difference after they have the ball in their hands and scoot down the field. We didn't have in Jimmy Garoppolo a guy who is typically going to throw the deep ball. We've added Trey Lance, which now adds another component to the game when he's in there. And I know that's been the huge topic, but one thing Kyle Shanahan said is there are going to be packages for him from the outset. He's going to play. And I saw them running a lot of red zone packages with him when I was there at training camp. There are things that he can do differently, including being a real threat as a runner down in the red zone, a place where the 49ers have typically struggled for the last couple of years. So I think versatility is a huge thing on the 49ers offense. Again, it's sort of that mixing and matching of personnel and pieces, a lot of motion, a lot of pre-snap motion that you get, and trying to confuse defenses by setting that up. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of those things stick around. You have to do what your offense can handle. I've only seen a little bit of Zach Wilson, but it's pretty exciting, and he certainly can throw the ball, and I think he's going to continue to grow. They obviously love what they saw in him. I appreciate that the Niners, I think they knew what they were doing in the draft, because, they knew what the Jets were going to do. Yeah. So I think that really helped. Helped them be able to plan what they were going to set up in this year's draft and getting Trey Lance. But I think that's what's exciting about the offense is all of a sudden you'll see somebody take off and run a play. There's sweeps, you just don't know what's coming, because Shanahan's always thinking ahead. And I think I don't know if you saw the last preseason game where they were rotating Garoppolo, and
that was interesting.
I don't know that it's going to be like that. No, I think most of us were surprised to see it like that every, like,
yeah, right.
It was like, after a certain, after gain a first down, then the next guy would be in, or whatever they were doing. And then they ended up with Garoppolo running it in for a score, which, was like the thing that we could never make happen in the regular season. So I always feel like there's stuff up his sleeve that we don't know about. And that may be a little, maybe a little aggressive for Mike LaFleur, just calling plays, at starting call plays. I thought I read somewhere, and I'm not sure, I mean, you're the expert on this team, but that he was used to being on the sideline, but he was being asked to be up in the booth to call the plays.
Yes, interesting. Mike LaFleur actually, apparently, according to his preference from Saleh, he likes being up in the booth and kind of getting
Oh,
the bird's
yeah.
eye
So it
view.
was moving down.
Right. Saleh keeps trying to get him down here, saying, on the ground level. So as soon as Zach Wilson comes off the field, they're doing the mano-y-mano. So
Right.
Saleh's the one who's like trying to get Mikey, who he calls him. He's trying to get him down on the sideline all the time. But I think ultimately he's going to let him do what he wants. And I think LaFleur prefers upstairs.
I think there's probably a way that he can see the field, up there that you just can't when you're on the side. And, they got communication things they could do.
Technology.
He doesn't have to be right next to Zach Wilson. But it is interesting, just sort of personal preference and what they do. But I'm excited. Like I'll be paying closer attention to the Jets than I ever have. Let's put it that way.
That's for sure, and we love the support. Thank you so much. A couple of quickies here, Stefania, before we get you out of here. So, running back wise, are they willing? And again, this is speculation. Again, Mike LaFleur is a first-time play caller, so I'm just trying to guess on things that San Francisco is doing. Maybe he'll bring over. So Raheem Mostert seems to be the guy. Are they willing to feed just one guy if it's a hot hand like Raheem Mostert? Because I know they have a lot of other guys, and we've seen that in the past. Or is it just running back by committee? It doesn't matter who's the hot hand. They're just going to keep rotating if they're in San Francisco. Is that like this?
I feel like I could answer that question better if we had consistently healthy running backs for the last 2 years. And we haven't. Raheem Mostert was hurt and was out for a while. So then Jeff Wilson Jr. got a lot of run. Jeff Wilson Jr. is out for multiple months now because of a meniscus surgery. So Trey Sermon, who they drafted this year, ended up getting a lot more reps in camp than you might have expected that he would. And they've had a lot of depth at running back traditionally. I think it goes back to when Kyle Shanahan was relatively new to San Francisco and brought in Jerick McKinnon. You thought, okay, he wants to do X, Y, and Z with Jerick McKinnon. He's pass catching back, brought him in from the Vikings. They paid him. So they clearly, had plans for him. And then he tears his ACL. And then he was not able to come back even the year after that. So that sort of whole thing gets scrapped. And so it's just, we haven't seen them be able to do that. Now, whether it's a chicken and egg thing a little bit, because if you look at who they then are acquiring, it's people who can do multiple things and probably be rotated. So I don't feel like we have the hardcore bell cow, grinder running back on our staff. Raheem Mostert's an amazing runner and he's super fast, right? I think he has the fastest clock time on the field last year, even ahead of Tyreek Hill, even though, Tyreek Hill is he wants you to know he's the fastest, but he has had hamstring issue, ankle, it's going to happen. I always say running back is the most vulnerable position. So I actually like the idea of having depth and more versatility because I think it just makes it easier on them to keep the offense, humming, even if they don't have somebody who's regularly there. But they have a couple of different style runners. That's why I wondered if they were going to keep Wayne Gallman and sort of use him as just a power, like move a couple of yards on the ground kind of guy, but they had the luxury of having a number of backs who could be helpful for them. And they really like Jeff Wilson Jr. for what he did late last year. And I think they know that they're going to get him back. So to answer your question, I don't know that it's a goal of theirs to go with a single back. And I don't know whether that was born out of necessity or not, but I think for the offense that Shanahan has, he probably prefers to have the options.
All right, last one before we get you out of here. Jet fans are drooling over some guy named Elijah Moore that they got number 34 overall. And again, as Jet fans are looking over here, then looking over there, 49ers, Jets, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk, could that be a connection? Stefania, first off, what is that role? Because people just say it. Deebo Samuel, jet sweeps, pop screens, all these different kinds of things to orchestrate the offense to get that player the ball. What is that role? Because Jet fans are hoping that can be Elijah Moore.
Yeah, I don't know, Kyle Shanahan might shake his head at me, but I feel like this hybrid. I've called it this hybridization of the receiver and the running back where, they're not, it's not Tyreek Hill. It's not go straight down the field. And not that Tyreek Hill can't run routes. He certainly can't, but you're not looking for that big bomb. That's a rarity in the San Francisco offense. You don't see it. We did see, I think that when they had Trey Lance and there was like the 80-yard play, the big bomb to, it was Sherfield was the receiver on that. And so 49er fans were like, whoa, hey, what's that? Because we haven't seen that. But more often what you see are, shorter passes, whether it's screen pass, there's, like you said, there's a lot of these motion plays where you're like, you might just get the handoff to the receiver and then they're asked to make a play out of it. So I just view it as more of a hybrid type role as opposed to what we think of as a pure wide receiver. You're going to run this route, be there, catch the ball, move on. And don't forget, they have a great pass catching tight end in George Kittle, who actually does a lot of the same things. I mean, it's unusual. George Kittle is the hybrid tight end that is really good and loves to block and is really good and loves to catch and score touchdowns. So I feel like it's not a very sophisticated answer, but that's who they are. Deebo Samuel, when he was at South Carolina, was a hugely explosive playmaker, and he was a returner as well. So, but I think he plays a little bit reckless. Like, he's just crazy. He wants to run and that's a little bit of what's gotten him into trouble in terms of some of the injury issues that he's had. And so as exciting and electric as he is, he's a bit of a high risk. Brandon Aiyuk, I thought, was a really interesting draft choice for them. I don't think a lot of us saw it coming, but then you look at the offense that he was working in Arizona State, where he had more specific routes to run. A lot of college offenses, as you know, you feel like it's like line up, go fast, quarterback, look for open guy.
Right.
And I asked Aiyuk when I saw him this summer how much that, working that offense with Herm Edwards at Arizona State helped him in advance of coming to the Niners. And he was like, oh, it was tremendous because I understood route running better when I got here. And then he had to adjust. Very tough for rookies who came in last year, every team, because with COVID, they were not there for OTAs. And you think about it, they didn't even get a chance to work on installs of offenses until they were in training camp for the very first time. They haven't even met their teammates. And that's basically, they're meeting them, they're getting to know them, and they're trying to learn the offense. And then in his case, with the injuries, he was asked to do more as a rookie, but I think he was set up for it because of his training. I liked Elijah Moore. I mean, to me, he's one that I kind of had my eye on because I thought he could really fit that role there. So we'll see how much Mike LaFleur asks of his receivers in that way. And I don't know that they're all built for it, but I felt like Elijah Moore's selection was because he could succeed in that fashion.
And I will say, it surprised a lot of us that, the Jets, obviously, 2-14 season, they had a lot of places they could have went with that number 34 overall pick. When they pick Elijah, a lot of us were excited, like, whoa, didn't see that coming. And again, that vision, perhaps, of Michael LaFleur of what they could be. Stefania, I got to tell you, you're the best in the business. You're a legend. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, I thank you very much for having me, and I'm excited for your Jets. This is it's going to be fun to watch, and I hope that we see the fruits of these young coaches and what they aspire to do, and I hope it works out. It'd be really exciting for them. And look, you got a young quarterback. I mean, there's got to be so much good energy around there. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
We'll see you in the Super Bowl, Stefania. Jets 49ers to get a little Salah Shanahan action. How does that sound?
That would be fun. Out in LA. So it'd be in my old stomping grounds in California. It'd be fantastic.
All right. Well, we'll be hoping for it, Stefania. You do great work. Again, everybody who's listening and watching, follow Stefania Bell on all social media. She's the GOAT. She's the legend. She's fantastic. And we'll have to reconnect down the line. Thanks, Stefania.
Thanks for having me.